Be here. My name is Nick Mason. I'm a member of the Peace Committee here at Sandy Springfield's meeting. So I welcome you all here to Sandy Springfield's meeting. We're part of the Baltimore yearly meeting here in Sandy Springs, Maryland. Today we are sponsoring a conversation and a forum from the Friends Peace team in Europe. And we have two speakers who's going to give us an update on the information and what's going on directly in Europe and where we stand today and their actions and thoughts. Translation will be provided to us. Introducing our speakers, Janet Moles and Roma Dorkford will be here. This meeting is on Zoom and is going to be recorded. We welcome you all here, and at the end of the session or throughout the session, there'll be a chance for people to ask questions and make comments. So welcome. Glad to have all of you here this evening. Go ahead. Yeah.
Wow, you guys are really in for a treat. You really are. You know, we hear about all the awful things that are going on in the world, but believe me, there are some good things that are going on. And our two friends are going to inspire us and to tell us a little bit about what things that they are doing. And it was, I was in Moscow, gosh, I don't know, a long time ago, and I met this 24-year-old British guy, and he had brought some Chechens out of Chechnya to talk about the war that was going on at that time. And Russia had invaded Chechnya. There were troops on the ground. There was bombing, and this young man, who's a little older now, but he had a calling to go there with this war going on, and organized lots of wonderful things, and he inspired others to join in on the projects and the ideas, and now it's and they've been doing this, the same people, for 30 years now, at least that long. And you know, we've done many things together, and you're lucky to have him. You're very lucky to have him.
Yeah. 25. Yeah.
And it's my pleasure to, by the way, this gentleman's name is Chris Hunt.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So for the past week or so, it's been my pleasure to travel with Olha. She has a last name, but it's long and complicated. And everybody here recognizes her as Olha. I've learned so much and been so enriched by this experience. I hardly know where to start. She is from Lviv in Ukraine, where she does psychosocial work with the IDPs, that internally displaced people, refugees who left their homes but not their country. Yeah, and it's just a tremendous treat to have with her Roma, who lives here in the Sandy Spring community and has spoken Ukrainian pretty much from birth, and but grew up in the States. So she has been just an absolutely fantastic translator and helper in many ways. So I think we're going to start with Chris saying a few words, if he can get the microphone away from Janet.
And Roma.
You. So a lot of the work that we do, we're building peace in the North Caucasus and in Ukraine. And we're using various tools to do it, many originating from AVP, Alternatives to Violence Project, and the creating cultures of peace and justice. And one of the important tools that we use, which really helps people to calm down, especially when they've been involved in war and trauma, helps people to focus, to become present, is what we call stopping. So if we just start by doing that, by just relaxing in our bodies, keeping our eyes open, looking around, breathing, being aware of our breathing, aware of how our bodies are feeling our heartbeat. What a miracle, this thing called life. And when we stop, we're able just to be here and now. We're able to return to the present moment, which is such a powerful tool in many situations. And it helps us to access the transforming power of life, which is what we need to sustain ourselves in very difficult, traumatic situations, and also in order to have that inner strength and connectivity to build peace. So thank you, friends. Thank you for being present. And Olga and I would like to share some information about the situation in the North Caucasus and in Ukraine, first of all, just to give you a bit of an overview. And if we could start with the first slide, please. So I'm here, represent the Centre for Peacebuilding and Community Development, or Peacebuilding UK, which has been the vehicle for a lot of the work since the 90s in Chechnya and the North Caucasus. And we're now working in very close partnership with Friends Peace Teams. If we could move to the next one, please. So in 1994, the first war in Chechnya broke out when Russia, as Janet said, Russia invaded. This is the Caucasus region, right down in the south of the Russian Federation. Just to the north of the green mountains, the Caucasus Mountains, is the Republic of Chechnya. And next to it, neighboring republics, Ingushetia and Dagestan, which is where a lot of our work is also based. So next slide, please. So there we see Chechnya with Dagestan to the east, Ingushetia to the west. A very small republic, population 1 million, a Muslim republic, very traditional in many ways. And that small republic of 1 million received the might of the Russian army, the Russian Air Force and the Russian army in the 90s. The next slide, please. So there again, we can see Chechnya, and you can see that the south is mountainous terrain, very high mountains, And then there's the kind of foothills, and then the green bits in the north, which is, you know, flatter, mostly agricultural land. And to the south is Georgia and Azerbaijan, the Caspian Sea to the east and the Black Sea to the west. Next slide, please. Next. Yeah, next one. Yeah, so as you can see, beautiful mountains, and these are some of the traditional stone towers that you see up there in the mountains. Next. And this shows us where Chechnya is in relation to the rest of Europe, including Ukraine, which you can see there a little bit to the west. You can see how tiny it is. It's that red area there on the right of the map. Next one. And there is the republic with the capital Grozny right in the middle. And in 1995, I went to Grozny as part of a peace march. It was called a march for a mother's march for life and compassion. During the war, the Russian soldiers' mothers played a very active role in opposing the war and standing up to their government to say that it was wrong. And many of them traveled themselves extremely courageously to Chechnya from Moscow, and actually went into Chechnya to the war zone, demanded to see the generals, and with the help of Chechen women, managed to find where their sons were based. And when they found where they were based, they would go there and speak to the generals in charge of them and say, I want to take my son back home with me. and they were a force. They were really a force to be reckoned with. They also politically gained a strong voice during that first war. And we partnered with them in initiating this march from Moscow to Chechnya to call for an end of the war in March of 1995. And at that time, Grozny was being bombarded. It was the center of the city was absolutely flattened. Tens of thousands killed within a few months. So our aim was to bring the attention of people in Russia, but also in the rest of the world, to the horrors that were happening in Europe on our doorstep. And to the suffering of the people in Chechnya. And we had various film crews that came along with the march that filmed it, both that showed it in Russia and also in Europe, from several different countries. So it was really a call to the international community to stand up and intervene and not just stay on the sidelines, which was remarkably successful in some ways, but the international community was very, was very quiet, really, in its response and in its condemnation of the killing of civilians. And in some ways, we can see how that has resulted in what is happening today in Ukraine, because Putin noted that the West response was weak and that their interests were in economic ties with Russia at the time. And therefore, he carried on and he annexed part of Georgia in South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and this use of military force to to coerce neighbours into submission to Russia's might has been used over the last 20 years since then, and tragically culminated in the war now raging in Ukraine. So let's have the next slide. So now I'm going to pass over for a while to Olga, who is going to take you through some of the introduction to the situation in Ukraine.
Я передам мікрофон. Вам треба краще її чути.
You need to hear me better, so that's why I gave her the microphone. Can you hear me?
На цьому слайді Україна.
On this slide, you see Ukraine.
Це моя країна, її столиця Київ.
That's my country. The capital is Kyiv.
І там, де червоним кольором на сході позначено,
And on the right side, you see the color red, purple.
території, де зараз точаться запеклі бої.
That's the area where there is fierce fighting right now.
Саме там лінія фронту, саме там найгарячіше.
That's the line of the front, and that's where it is now the hottest.
Але це не означає, що інші міста в безпеці.
But that doesn't mean that the rest of the cities are safe.
Адже російські ракети летять на всі найбільші міста в Україні.
Rockets are flying on all the cities of Ukraine. And my vowels confused between the two languages.
Дуже страждає інфраструктура кожного великого міста.
And especially the infrastructure of each city has been hit the hardest in any larger city.
Незважаючи на те, що Львів набагато західніше, він на кордоні під Польщею.
Lviv is farther west, practically on the border of Poland.
У Львів теж долітають ракети.
And the rockets reach Lviv also.
Ніхто в Україні не знаходиться в безпеці.
Nobody in the country is safe.
Більше року така ситуація.
And it's been going on for over a year.
Дуже багато людей постраждали.
Many people suffered.
Дуже багато втратили свої домівки.
People lost their residences, their homes.
Багато втратили свої сім'ї.
They lost their families.
Там зірочками видно, куди найбільше потрапляють ракети, куди найбільше влучають російські ракети.
And on this map, the towns are marked where many of the Russian rockets have fired.
На цьому слайді солдат з дитиною.
There 471 children died. 952 children had serious wounding. They were seriously hurt. Wounded.
І це дані за рік від початку російської агресії. Вже кілька місяців ці дані збільшуються знову.
That data is only for the first year of what was going of the Russian aggression, and by now it's increased.
І це тільки про дітей.
And that's just the children.
Next. Тут зазначені дати найкривавіших російських терактів.
And over here, we see the dates of the most violent Russian terrorist acts.
І внизу вказані цифри мирних жителів.
On the
які
left,
загинули.
you see how many civilians died in those attacks.
Але це не точні дані.
But that's not really, that's not exact figures. These are,
Тому що багато є зниклих безвісти.
many have disappeared without knowledge or missing,
Багато невідомих.
and their fate is unknown.
І ми ніколи не знаємо до кінця скільки.
And we never know exactly how many.
А це цифри теж досить великі, скільки дітей, скільки людей, скільки ракет, скільки повітряних тривог. Багато.
And these figures summarize what happened. How many rockets were fired and hit, how many children.
Повітряних тривог.
We had over 2 million air raid,
Скільки українців емігрували за кордон.
and many of the Ukrainians immigrated.
Але це теж не точні дані, тому що вони постійно змінюються, поповнюються.
But this is constantly changing. 8 мільйонів подалося за кордон.
Так, що це
8 million emigrated from Ukraine. The total population was about 40. So it's 20% of the people immigrated.
So now we return back to the North Caucasus and Chechnya, and this is what the capital, Grozny, looked like before the war in the 90s. Go to the next. Have to go next. Yeah, so it was a thriving city in the North Caucasus, as I said, population of the republic about 1 million. Next. Then in spring 1995, the Russians invaded and for months used all their firepower against Grozny. One of the things that people observing, including myself, couldn't understand was that the center of Grozny was inhabited by ethnic Russians. The Chechens used to live, on the edge of Grozny or in the villages or in the mountains, but it was the Russians in Grozny who were being hammered by these airstrikes for months on end in Grozny. So the destruction was just unbelievable. And, going through Grozny at that time, it was impossible to even imagine that it could ever be rebuilt. It was just everything was gone. Everything was almost flattened. Many had to flee from Chechnya into the neighboring republics, such as here in Ingushetia. This is one of the camps. Many fled during the winter months when it's very cold, down to -20, -25 Celsius. And we're living in tents in those conditions. And one of the first things that we were moved to do to respond to all of this was to provide psychosocial assistance to children and young people. And that included art and art therapy. And some of the children had tremendous gifts and created amazing images like this, some of which were later used in the Power of Goodness stories. And so the peace building element of the work, we found that the people were very, very receptive to learning tools of peace and non-violence, including good communication skills. And so the work of AVP in creating cultures of peace and justice is something that we've always found that people across the region have welcomed very, very enthusiastically. And this is our the program that we ran from the mid-90s called Little Star, psychosocial project. And around 30,000 children actually went through that program and received psychosocial assistance, both in the camps in Ingushetia and in Chechnya. And this Aslan in the middle, one of the psychologists and some of the children. So I'm doing some creative activities. When they moved back into Chechnya, we were able to work in school buildings. And another thing that we did was we supported a Chechen children's dance ensemble. For them, traditional dance is extremely important. And so one of the ways that we were able to support them was to give them facilities to do that. And also if you go to the next one, we gave them the opportunities to tour around Europe. And so they were able to show their amazing dance skills, and it was great to portray something very vibrant and positive about Chechnya, because if you only talk about war and violence, it gets too much for people. But this was something incredibly creative, but we could also explain what was happening and how important it is to support people there and to build peace. So that's called the shepherd's dance. With their traditional woolen hats. Amazingly acrobatic and gifted, the children. They work and train really hard to get to that standard. And this is one of the girls' dances. And this was, you may recognize there, the second from the left is Olga. This was a training that we did up in the mountains in Georgia a few years ago, which Nadine Hoover also attended. And this was an 8-day intensive training on creating cultures of peace and justice, which involves a lot of elements of AVP, the Alternatives to Violence project. And this is doing concentric circles, one of the activities. The mandala, AVP mandala. And this was the group when we went out for a trip into the mountains. And so this is work which we've been doing for the last few years on gender equality and stereotypes. Chechnya is a Muslim republic, quite traditional, quite conservative, but in the last 10 years, they've had a very authoritarian leadership, more than 10 to 15 years. And actually women's rights and girls' rights has gone very much backwards, to the extent that, you know, they used to be able to go freely to university and do many different professions, but that has been limited a lot, and many girls are pressured to stay at home and, you know, come out of school early, 13 or 14, and do housework. And so this project is about exploring gender stereotypes with the young people in schools, with girls and with boys, to start raising questions and exploring what is actually more healthy, both for girls and for boys in the society. And this is one of the young men or boys there standing in a box. And when they stand in the box, they are experiencing the stereotypes. And on the left there is our colleague Rustam, who has been involved in this work since 1999. And in fact, Janet met him in 2009 in Turkey. And it's quite interesting, the link between our work for peace in Ukraine and the North Caucasus. In the 90s, when the situation in Chechnya and the region was really quite desperate, we invited some colleagues over from Ukraine, from the Odessa mediation group, to work with our colleagues who were wanting to learn peace-building tools. And then when the first invasion, Russian invasion into Ukraine happened in 2014, by then our colleagues like Rustam, who'd been working for 15 years or so, had developed many new tools. And so we invited our colleagues like Rustam and others from Chechnya to come to Ukraine. In fact, the Odessa Mediation Group, that same organization, invited us back together with the colleagues from Chechnya. And we were doing, we brought with us the story, the Power of Goodness stories, which Janet has been so involved in for 100 years, as she said this morning. And so these stories, our colleagues in Chechnya and North Caucasus have found them to be such a valuable tool in working with the young people. You know, they love the stories, they get immersed in the stories, they identify with the characters. And we found it, as well as an important peace education tool, it's also a very valuable psychosocial tool. And so we, you know, having been working on this for many years in Chechnya and the North Caucasus, in 2014 and 2015, we started to work with psychologists like Olga and teachers and educators in Ukraine, bringing those Power of Goodness stories to Ukraine. And this is in Odessa in Ukraine, and most of the people here are Ukrainian psychologists and educators, and then there are also several of our colleagues from Chechnya, including Benera, who is the second from the right standing up there, and Rashana in the green headscarf and dress, and Birvant next to her. So from 2014 to 2019, we developed this, we went on an amazing journey, really, sharing the Power of Goodness stories with our Ukrainian friends. from all parts of Ukraine, from initially in Odessa, but then also from other parts of the south of the country and from Kiev and from Western Ukraine also. And last year, we actually received the great news that our Ukrainian colleagues had created a new version of the Power of Goodness stories in Ukrainian and English and Russian. Yeah, so that is the book which is here. So it's it's just amazing, really, how it started, you know, with Janet going out and working with Misha, and then deciding to do the Chechen version. And then we started working in Chechnya, and then stories from Chechnya were added to the pool of stories. And then we went over to Ukraine when it was really needed, and it spread there, and the receptivity was amazing there. And so now we have many new Power of Goodness stories by Ukrainians, you know, in Ukrainian, and also translated into other languages. So, I mean, the last 20, 30 years, the violence, the war, the Russian invasions, the suffering of people has been phenomenal. But on another level, there's this yearning for peace. There's so many people who don't want that anymore. That's not the mindset, that's not the life that they want to live. They want to live a different life. So whether it's Chechens, Russians, Ukrainians, people are really thirsty and receptive to these tools. So now I'm going to pass back to Olga, who's going to talk about more about the work in Ukraine.
Ця книжка була видана якраз перед війною. Ну, в принципі, в часи війни, бо вона от мала вийти, вона вже була видана була вдруг. Як почалась війна, вона була нами отримана, вона була здійснена.
This book was in the process shortly before the last invasion happened, and after the invasion happened, we received it, and it was very timely at the moment.
Ми працювали над цією книжкою українською командою, застосовуючи весь свій досвід, взятий від чеченських колег, Кріса, від команди Францискін, всіх, хто там працює.
We had a team that worked on this book. We included our learnings from Chris and others who have done work like that previously.
Тут є деякі найперші історії, самі перші з першої книги.
Перші книжки чеченські історії в цьому томі включені. You understood exactly what I said. That book includes Chechen stories from the very first publication on the Power of Goodness.
І з книжки саме першої світові історії, чеченської і світові історії.
So there were Chechen stories and stories from other parts of the world too.
Ми своєю українською командою, власне, робили цю книжку на 3 мовах, не просто так.
The Ukrainian team worked on getting the book published in 3 different languages. It was not a simple undertaking.
Ми не хотіли, щоб мова роз'єднувала нас.
We didn't want the language to separate us, to differentiate us.
Бо багато українців говорять російською мовою дуже добре.
Many Ukrainians speak Russian very well.
Але так сталося, що російська мова стала приводом для початку війни, яка триває вже рік в Україні.
But it so happened that the Russian language was an excuse for a war that's lasted for over a year now.
Бо під приводом захисту російськомовного населення на нашу країну напали.
Because with the excuse and to defend the Russian language population of Ukraine, Russia invaded. It doesn't make sense, no.
І це жахливо.
And that is terrible.
Ми хотіли б, щоб мова не роз'єднувала людей, а об'єднувала.
We would like for language not to separate people, but to bring them together.
І тому я тут.
And that's why it's published in Ukrainian, Russian, and English.
Я не буду показувати вам слайди з зруйнованими будинками і мертвими людьми.
I will not be showing you slides of ruined buildings and dead people.
Хоча війна несе. І все це відбувається.
Because the war brings such scenes on into my country.
Я вам розкажу, чим я займаюся у Львові.
I will tell you the work I do in Lviv.
Саме цей слайд показує, чим я займаюся.
And that slide shows what it is that I do.
Я є психолог, і я працюю з групами людей.
I'm a psychologist and I work with groups of people.
Я працюю індивідуально, я надаю допомогу і кризове консультування.
Yeah, I also work with individuals and in crisis situations.
А ми проводимо подібні зібрання в публічних місцях. Проводимо в публічних місцях подібні зібрання.
Most of the meetings happen in public settings.
Зазвичай ми використовуємо бібліотеки або великі зали певних студій, театрів.
And in general, we either use library facilities or the studios in the different theaters.
Ця моя робота зараз сфокусована на подолання травми.
And most of my work now is targeted at dealing with trauma.
Це дуже красномовний слайд.
This is a very picturesque slide. Tells a lot.
Це не романтичні свічки.
They're not romantic candles.
Це свічки, які запалювали в магазинах, квартирах, коли в Україні стався перший блекаут.
These are candles that were lit in homes and stores and schools when the blackouts started.
Люди були не готові до того, що може вимкнутися світло, зовсім пропасти електроенергія у всьому величезному місті.
People were not expecting, were not used to the idea that one could lose all power, all electrical power in the whole city.
І надовго, на години, іноді на дні.
For long hours and occasionally more than several days long.
І не тільки електроенергія, виключався зв'язок.
It wasn't just that we lost power, we also lost means of communication.
Газове постачання.
And gas was also not below the Chechnya.
Так, і вода, тому що не було.
And no water.
Це були дуже важкі часи, бо все це відбувалося зимою.
Those times are very difficult, and all of this was going on in the winter time.
Власне, була така думка, ми не знали, як можна бути в квартирі зимою, коли її не можна якимось чином обігріти.
We had no idea what it would be like. We didn't imagine being in your home with no heat and no way to warm yourself up.
І було дуже важко.
It was a very difficult winter.
І ми намагалися жити під час цього періоду.
And we tried to work through it.
Я пам'ятаю, як висилала Тиртл фотографії, де робила уроки зі своєю дочкою при свічках.
I made photographs of my daughter with just candlelight.
Тому що дітям треба вчити.
And they were doing their homework by candlelight because they had to keep on studying.
Цей намет і інші подібні намети були встановлені владою міста для того, щоб люди могли обігрітися під час зимового періоду і зарядити свої телефони, комп'ютери, власне, там генератор.
This tent, as well as others, the city administration acquired them so people could come there, get some warmth, and also recharge their telephones, their computers, whatever.
Бо дуже часто потрібно було мати зв'язок.
Because people needed to be able to communicate with others.
І на полицях магазинів пропали, зникли всі павербанки, всі зарядні пристрої.
And all kinds of power packets for recharging. Everything disappeared from the stores. They were not available, out of stock.
Ми знаходили якісь можливості дати собі ради.
We found a way to survive that, to manage.
І я в той час все одно робила свою роботу.
And I continued to do my work.
Ми проводили далі тренінги, збирали групи. Коли було дуже холодно, коли ми всі сиділи в верхньому одязі, кутались ще чимось зверху.
Even when it was very cold and we were all sitting wrapped and bundled in our coats and other things to keep ourselves warm, we still continued with the groups.
Ну, на цьому фото вже було тепліше.
And on that photograph, it was a little bit warmer by then.
І ми продовжували збиратися і підтримувати людей.
And we continued to meet and support each other.
На таких зібраннях у нас завжди було дуже багато переселенців, мігрантів з інших міст.
There were many people who resettled to Lviv from other parts of the country.
І їм було дуже важливо знайти середовище, де б їх прийняли, де б їх почули, де б вони могли сказати, як їм болить, як їм важко.
And they needed to find a setting where they could feel comfortable, where people would understand what they're feeling and would listen to them.
Ми збирали дуже часто, було по кілька груп на тиждень.
We had several groups meeting like that each week.
Ті та інші люди постійно звертались до мене індивідуально.
And these people also asked for individual consultations with me.
Адже в них є кожного діти, батьки, якась родина, і це завжди проблеми, які супроводжують людину під час життя.
They all had children, parents, other members of the family that in the normal course of life are great challenges. And this was more than that on top of the normal challenges.
Отже, робота з травмою стала головною моєю роботою цілий рік.
So for a whole year, working with trauma was my work.
І, власне, ця робота продовжується і далі.
And it continues even now.
Тому що ми живемо далі, але далі продовжуємо.
because we still live and the war goes on and continues.
І чи виходять люди зі стресу? Та ні.
People never get any relief for their stress.
І все це продовжується знову, знову, знову.
And it happens again and again and again.
А цей чоловік, цей поважний старший чоловік, прийшов на одну з наших груп.
This gentleman came to one of our groups.
І він говорив російською мовою.
He spoke Russian,
Але він сказав, що Львів так прихистив його, стільки йому дав,
but he said that the city of Lviv embraced him and gave him so much.
і він почав вивчати українську.
So he started to study the Ukrainian language.
І він так мило намагався говорити зі мною українською мовою.
And he really tried to speak Ukrainian with me.
І то було так приємно.
And that gave me a lot of pleasure and satisfaction.
Нема кордонів для того, щоб допомогти людині.
There's no boundaries. You can help people across any kind of separation or chasm.
Якою мовою не говорила людина,
No matter the language that the person speaks.
є інша мова, мова серця, мова тіла. І ми можемо говорити так.
It's a language of the heart. It's the language of the body. We can communicate with that too.
Я дуже хочу приїхати наступного разу і показати вам, як відбудовується Україна.
I really, really want to come another time to show you how Ukraine is being rebuilt.
Я хочу розказати, як ми відновлюємося.
I want to tell you about how we revived ourselves and rejuvenated ourselves.
Я не хочу говорити, як нам болить.
I don't want to talk about all of our pains and hurts.
Я хотіла показати вам інші картинки.
I would love to show you different illustrations.
Дуже сподіваюся, що зроблю це наступного разу.
And I promise I'll do it next time.
So just like, yeah, before questions, I just wanted to say something brief about what Friends Peace Teams is doing now, and what we're able to do right now in Ukraine and the North Caucasus. And then there'll be times for questions. And so this work of Friends Peace Teams relies on donations. And for $400 to $600 a month, we're able to support a small team in a city in Ukraine and the North Caucasus. So in Ukraine, so far, it's Lviv and Olga and some of her colleagues. And in Chechnya, we're also supporting a small team in Grozny. And they are doing work on power of goodness. And they are training teachers in how to use the resource of power of goodness, together with a teacher's training manual, which Janet and others here, Nancy, worked on in producing. So they've already worked with hundreds of teachers. And the reason that we're working with teachers is because they then go on and use these stories with their pupils in schools. So we've worked out that reaches over 5,000 children a year, because they use their tutor group periods to share the stories and work on the stories. And so we give them copies of the book, copies of the teacher's training manual, and so we do this training with them, and then go on to share that with the children. So it really has a multiplier effect. It's not just one or two people doing workshops, it's multiplying. And in fact, just this past week, our team in Chechnya have managed to agree with the teacher training college that they have started going in regularly to train the instructors who train the teachers. So in that way, even more teachers are being reached, and so even more children will be reached. So in those two locations in Lviv in Ukraine and Grozny in Chechnya, we're able to do this work for about $400 to $600 a month. And that support is amazing, and that links people here and in Europe with the work on the ground, and it enables the work. So we're very, very grateful for that. And with more funds, we'll be able to open more centers like that in other cities in Ukraine, and further work in the North Caucasus. So this support is a vital element of the work. So here is the information for Friends Peace Teams, the website, and there's a page there on how to donate, and either it can be done online or checks can be sent to that address in St. Louis. And also there is the website of Peace Building UK to find out more of the work that we do.
So before we move on completely from here, I want to mention that there are donation envelopes available here that have the St. Louis address pre-printed on them. So you don't have to remember that, and you can check off where you would like your donation to go, or write in something specific. I want this to go to Olha, I want this to go to Chris's work. We also have an e-newsletter that comes out. It's really not oppressively lot to all, once or twice a month, usually with the Europe news and occasional news that we feel safe to send out from Chechnya. And we have a sign-up list here. If you would like to receive any of those newsletters, boy, please sign on the list and we'll get you all registered to get those newsletters. We also have copies of our latest edition of Power of Goodness here on the table for sale. A few things that are here, our Friends Peace Teams Peaceways newsletter that comes out once a year with news from all the different parts of Friends Peace Teams. We're doing a lot more than just the Europe work. And I believe the book on creating cultures of peace is also here for purchase. So that's all on the table as you go out. And I think now we want to open it for questions, is that right?
Could we pass the book around?
Yeah.
Yeah, Nick will take the microphone to people who want to speak. They have to do that because of the Zoom. You have to sneak into the microphone. Yes.
Right, yes. I'm very much moved by your work. And the fact that you give to people who are struggling with sadness and unknown, who supports you. How do you do it?
Це гарне запитання.
It's a very nice question.
Я вчу людей знаходити опору в собі.
When I work with people, I teach them how to find support within themselves rather than seeking outside.
Але ви праві, опора потрібна і мені теж.
But you're absolutely right. I need support too.
Так, я маю опору, я маю опору в френській.
I have support with Chris.
Але в френській стім. Я маю опору у вигляді своєї сім'ї,
I have support from my family,
своїх друзів,
my friends,
своїх колег.
my colleagues.
Я стараюсь наповнювати себе ресурсом.
I keep on filling myself with many kinds of resources.
Для моєї роботи потрібно дуже багато ресурсів.
With my work, one needs a whole lot.
Тому так. Я маю підтримку у вигляді квакерів, які тут сидять.
I get support from people who sit here, from the friends, Quakers.
Ну так, я маю.
So I have support.
І я вам за неї вдячна.
And for that support, I am very grateful to you.
I'd just like to add that we had hoped to have one or two colleagues from Chechnya here and, on this tour. But unfortunately, since the war in Ukraine began, since Russia invaded Ukraine, or at least this most recent phase of it, since last year, civil society and non-governmental organizations in Russia there's been a huge crackdown, and the authorities are putting huge pressure on them. They're harassing them in an awful way. They're trying to stamp out any independent voices and work. So I just like to ask friends to hold our colleagues in the light who are continuing this work in these conditions. Of course, for them, for self-preservation, the easiest thing would be just to say, no, this is just too much. But they don't do that. And it's not because we're telling them to continue, it's because they believe so deeply in what they're doing, and they believe that for their societies to survive, for the young people's hope to survive, really, they have to continue doing this work. And so their motivation is that deep, that they're prepared to have visits from the FSB who sit with them, and they talk about their relatives and what might happen, what could happen to their relatives. So the pressure is immense, and that's why they couldn't be here, because if they were here when they went back, their lives would be, even more in danger. So they continue doing the work because they're very deeply dedicated to it, and they feel it's their calling, and they have to do that. But for us all just to be aware of the pressure that they're under. And whenever we can, we bring them out of the region for respite and for training and for creating cultures of peace in Turkey or Armenia. And that is so important to them, because that's their chance to really relax and to get some respite. So, yeah.
Many of us don't know what the book is. So what is it? How is it used? What is the power of goodness, and how, do you use it?
Perhaps we could pass around some of the yellow books as well, which, the English version of Power of Goodness. I mean, this one going around has English as well as Ukrainian and Russian. But these are stories which have been written by people all over the world, from Russia, from Chechnya, from Ukraine, from the United States, from England, even from Palestine, and they're stories of ordinary people who have faced challenging situations, usually involving violence, but they've found a way to overcome that or to work through that using non-violence, and they've managed to stories of non-violence and reconciliation. So they're real life stories of how people have used transforming power, the transforming power of life to completely change a situation and somehow shift it away from violence to non-violence. And this is why it appeals so much to children, because it's people that have done this from the heart. They found in themselves these resources of non-violence, and we just find that it resonates so strongly with children and adults alike. The stories are inspiring. So yeah, I would encourage you to have a look, and if you wish to purchase the book, to read the stories for yourselves, to really
$20, the English version. There's an envelope up here that will accept your $20.
I think there's a question online. Go ahead, Stan.
Yes, thank you very much. Two questions, actually. I believe Chris mentioned how some Russian mothers came to Chechnya to find their sons and try and bring them home. Is there any movement of this type by Russian mothers with sons in Ukraine, or that would be totally disallowed at this point? And second question, I wonder, Quaker House in Moscow, are they able to do anything, or are they totally stifled by the suppression there? Thank you.
So the Russian soldiers' mothers do still exist, and the situation during this war is very different than in the previous war. Speaking up against the war in Russia is enough to be sent to jail for 15 years. So it's a very, very different situation. And the ability to actually travel to Ukraine and bring their sons out is the possibilities are far, far less than was the situation in Chechnya. So although there are the soldiers' mothers, and they are experiencing tremendous pain and anguish over what is happening and the mobilization, and young men as young as 18 being sent to Ukraine forcefully, their ability to speak out is much reduced this time. And that's something for us to also remember, that the numbers, the Russian army is in total chaos and disarray. Those who are going to fight in Ukraine do not want to fight in Ukraine. They're going there because they're forced to. The conditions that they're in, the equipment is totally inadequate. It's a total mess. And the Ukrainians, I think the latest estimate of the number of Russian servicemen killed in Ukraine in the last year is 150,000, which is just unbelievable. This is not what people in Russia are hearing. People in Russia are hearing that maybe it's about 1,000 or a few thousand, but it's actually already even if more conservative estimates of 60,000 is already 3 times more than the Soviet Union lost in Afghanistan over 10 years. So yeah, the situation is very, very different. And the second question was about what can Friends House Moscow, yeah. Do you want to say?
Friends House Moscow is not a political organization. They are also not registered as an NGO in Russia. They have 2 boards, one in Britain, I believe, and one in the United States, who employ, well, who contract with a small business in Russia. This way, they don't fall under the tremendous scrutiny that NGOs that are registered in Russia get. A lot of the work that Friends House Moscow is doing now is translating Quaker texts into Russian and publishing them there. And this is legal in Russia now. And they also are helping a lot of social assistance, little businesses get started. They really do mentor them through the first stages of becoming functional, and then they move their grant money to other organizations. So they're doing very important work in Russia, work that probably could not be done any other way, but it is not political work.
So they couldn't have an underground railroad to help conscientious objectors get out of the country or things like that, I guess, then. Thank you very much.
Yeah, as I understand it, that is not the work of Friends House Moscow at this point.
I just wondered, are the stories primarily by children, and what are the ages of the children?
The stories have been written by adults. And the intent in the beginning was that it would be like ages maybe 6 to 12, about that. But I know in Chechnya that there was one of the psychologists that Chris had that worked in universities. Yes, and they went over ever as well on university level. She worked with some young adults that were also out of school, totally. And you know, there were some individual stories on that, and they did give at the schools, the kids got to take their books home, and so they were reading them as families. And you know, I think they told the story of one parent that got a hold of the school and said, "Do you have any more of those stories? We're having trouble in our family, and they seem to help." You know, and but one story that really inspired me was, it was called The Moss, and it was a historic story. And the hero in the story was a Russian soldier. And here they are in Chechnya, and the war was actually going on at that time. And so they read this story and they discussed it. And it was, I think it was that they said a 9-year-old little boy said, after studying the story, "Oh, not all Russian soldiers are bad." Now, it's not a big thing, but for a child to take that in and be open to that is, you know, I'd love to know what's happened to him now. But there's, you know, most of the illustrations are done by kids ages about 8 or 9 up to 18.
I think what makes the stories even more powerful are the wonderful illustrations side by side. There was an edition where there weren't any illustrations with the stories. They were at the end of the story. And this is just unbelievably powerful.
And I just add to that, that many of those illustrations were done by children who were hiding out in basements in Grozny during that bombardment in 1995. That there was this amazing art teacher who knew about, who knew the stories, knew Power of Goodness, and she was working with the children in the basements while Grozny was being bombed. So, those illustrations were done by the children.
Well, this is indeed good news. I just want to take a moment and thank you for your hard work, your courage, and your example. We are constantly barraged with news about and examples of the application of military power, of geopolitical power. And what I really appreciate about this work is that, Chris, as he said, it's transformational power. And in my experience, that only comes through relationship. It does not come through bombs, it does not come through dudes in whites in blue suits sitting around conference tables at the UN. No offense to the UN, but the transformational power comes through relationship. And that, to me, seems to be the essence of the Power of Goodness approach. And it's just so refreshing. Thank you.
Hi, thanks as well. And I wanted to ask Luca, what sort of things with the adults that you have worked with, what sort of what factors or what things have helped them to be resilient in the face of so many traumas? Найперше, що я рекомендую робити дорослим, це поповнювати свій життєвий ресурс.
The first thing that I recommend in my work with adults is to supplement and continue to fulfill their internal resources.
Усе, що наповнює людину радістю, енергією, усе це дає їй силу для подолання багатьох неприємностей.
Because whatever gives the person satisfaction and happiness, that can help that person overcome many other challenges.
Ще однією рекомендацією є слухати своє тіло, слухати себе.
One of the recommendations is to listen to your own body, listen to yourself.
Не пропускати сигнали, які підказують, яка потреба зараз має бути задоволена.
Not to miss signals that communicate to you what needs attention now.
Можливо, ви потребуєте відпочинку.
Maybe you need rest.
Може, ви голодні.
Maybe you're hungry.
Може, ви хочете в туалет.
Maybe you need to go to the bathroom.
Ми повинні пам'ятати про себе і турбуватись про своє тіло.
We need to remember about ourselves and work and be concerned about our body,
Наше тіло це храм нашої душі.
because our body is the what sanctuary of our soul.
Ще однією рекомендацією є використовувати техніку тут і тепер.
Oh, the other recommendation I work with is for people to use the approach of here and now.
Дуже допомагають в цьому різні дихальні техніки.
And there are techniques of breathing exercises to get to the here and now.
Дихання по квадрату. Дихання по
You
квадрату.
try to breathe within a square.
Биття серця.
Notice the heartbeat, be aware of it,
Заземлення.
and be grounded, be centered.
Коли ми застосовуємо всі 5 чуттів своїх. 5 чуттів, які ми застосовуємо під час техніки заземлення.
And we need to experience things through all of our 5 senses. And we use those techniques during efforts for people to experience centeredness and groundedness.
Це важливо, тому що це повертає нас в наше тіло, не дає нам виходити десь в астрал з власними емоціями і переживаннями.
Because all of this allows us or helps us or pushes us to stay within our own body, and we don't run out and spread our emotions and our anger or whatever. We can keep it within ourselves.
Це повертає нам контроль і відчуття спокою.
That gives us back our control and a sense of peace.
Я контролюю себе, своє тіло, відчую своє дихання, я тут, тепер, я можу з цим справитися.
I control my body, I control my breathing. I am here, I am now, I can take care of everything.
Do you have more you want to say?
Oh my.
We were thinking we would close this around 9 o'clock, but we could probably be here till midnight. We wouldn't have heard all the many interesting things that these dear folks would share with us. Is there someone who has a burning question that didn't get asked? And we want to say thank you again to our guests. And we want to thank the audience for coming. And Janet, we thank you for bringing all of this to us. It was such a rich experience this evening. I'm sure most of you would agree with me that it's something we have not heard before.
Thank you very much.
There is one thing. Chris came all the way, he arrived at midnight last night. And so today's a special day. And Rex will sign. Happy birthday to you. God bless and peace is possible. Let's all get out there and do it.
Amen. Amen.